Filmmaker James Cameron has a reputation for running over budget and out of time. He also has a reputation for making visually stimulating and profitable movies loaded with action and special effects. Among them are Aliens, True Lies, The Terminator, and Terminator 2. His latest is Titanic. It was $100 million over its $100 million budget, but it is also being recognized as one of the best movies of the year. The New Yorker's Anthony Lane wrote, "The film is grand and wrenching. If you are going to spend $200 million on a movie, this is the way to do it." Joining me now, the man who made Titanic, James Cameron. Welcome to this program.
I'm so happy to be here. Great pleasure.
I saw the film last night. It's an extraordinary film. A friend of mine who was a film critic for an extraordinary newspaper said to me, it's her top 10, number one. And she was overwhelmed by the notion that it is a level of ambition that you expect Hollywood to do, and it hasn't been done recently. The notion that you make magic so that people come in to the theater and they get an experience beyond what they might otherwise have.
Yeah.
Tell me what you set out to do.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you say that, because when I think of what it was like for me in my sort of formative years, you know, as a teenager, kind of figuring out what the world was all about, you know, going to films and seeing and getting taken through that doorway into another world, whether it was science fiction or the past or just some other place, some other people, you know. And I think of what that meant to me at that time. And I think so many people in Hollywood, and I don't mean to diss Hollywood in any way, but they've lost touch with that sense of transport, you know, an almost religious transport that a movie is supposed to have. And I'm not saying that all films need to do this, but, you know, the thing that got me into filmmaking was the love of that sense of otherworldliness that a film can create in your mind and in your emotions.
Some place that you cannot.
Exactly. You know, out of your daily life into some place or some feeling. Sometimes it's not another place, it's another emotional place, you know, just so that you can make sure that the plumbing is all still working, you know, properly and safely. You know, you don't have to go through a loss in your life. You go through a simulation of that loss or something, you know, but I mean, it's taking you somewhere emotionally or visually. And, you know, the films that I loved when I was a kid were the big films.
Yeah.
You know, so
Gone with the Wind, David Lean's
Spartacus,
films.
the Lean films, 2001: A Space Odyssey, the films that really put something up there that you could not experience in your life. And so, with Titanic, once I'd sort of locked in on this subject.
But before you do that, tell me why Titanic and why you locked in on this subject.
It's interesting. I go back and I try to find the germinal moment, you know, and it's hard for me to locate. It was somewhere 5-ish years ago. I started thinking about some research that I had done where I had met with Dr. Robert Ballard, who discovered the wreck, and when I was doing The Abyss. But I wasn't interested in I wasn't seeing him about Titanic. I was seeing him about submersibles and remotely operated vehicles and these deep water robots that they're using and how all that worked. And he still had not sort of gotten over Titanic. He wanted to show me his tapes of how they discovered it and so on. And there was a little infection started right there. And then
you had the germ.
Yeah, I had the germ, and I didn't know it. It was incubating, you know. Yeah. And then I've always been an absolute lover of history. I've never really incorporated it into my work as a filmmaker, but I've always loved history, especially the antiquities, you know, ancient Rome and Greece and that sort of thing, but all history, really. And so I started reading up on the history of Titanic, not just the physicality of the wreck and the high technology of finding it, but, you know, who were these people, you know, and what did they experience? And it became, to me, such a fascinating story, as it has for many people who get sucked into the vortex of Titanic.
So what did you do then?
Then I started reading, and coincidentally, then I reached that stage, you know, which every filmmaker does, where you have this dawning, sort of creeping realization that you're probably going to make a film. Yeah. And it's like, please, God, let it not be a film about Titanic, because that's going to be a lot of work. And I got something in the mail, which was an invitation to a screening of Titanica, which was the IMAX film. And when I saw that, I realized that these scientific submersibles might be available to make a film, because they had done it for IMAX, which is a documentary, but I thought it's not that much of a greater leap to try to get these people involved in a fictional Hollywood movie. So I promptly, you know, flew to Moscow, and met with the people that had done the IMAX film and said, hey, can I use your subs? And then once they agreed, then it was, now I'm making a film. I guess I better come up with a story.
And so then you as a screenwriter have got to create a story.
Exactly.
What's the objective of the story? I mean, I'm fascinated by the Titanic and everything real that happened, but you have another obligation. You have an obligation to go beyond that and bring people in to see.
I think, to sum it up very succinctly, it's make it accessible somehow. Make Titanic accessible. Not that it's inaccessible in a way, but get the audience over that hump of watching a period film where people dress differently and they speak differently, and it all happened 85 years ago, and who cares? Get them in, get them involved subjectively in the event. And there's only one way to do that, which is through characters that you really love and care about. And, you know, we fall in love with Jack and Rose as they fall in love with each other, you know, up on the screen. And then there's a certain point where we realize we're on the ship with them. You know, I'm talking about as an audience, experientially, you know, in the watching of the film. And I think that you can't do that in a docudrama format where you have a multiplicity of characters and you do them all perfect historical justice. We very, very carefully observed the history and carefully observed the detail of the physicality of the film, you know, creating the sets and so on. But ultimately, it's an experience. It's an emotional experience. It's a love story. It's, you know, if to use one of my favorite films as a teenager, David Lean's film, Dr. Zhivago, it's not really about the Russian Revolution. It's really about these people in this event that's greater than them. And I think Titanic, my film Titanic, is the same thing.
Well, that's what great novelists do, from Tolstoy and whoever you wanted to write about.
Right. You borrow energy from the chosen setting. And in some way, I think that energy is returned as well, because by being subjectively involved through this love story, I think you have a more emotional appreciation of the event itself.
Now, why these two very young people as your operative characters as a screenwriter?
Well, the thing, my doorway into it was the wreck and the discovery of the wreck and the deep, you know, the deep submergence technology used to find it, you know, because I'm kind of a gearhead. So, you know, that's how I got interested in it. So I thought, all right, I want to do a present day kind of bookending, you know, technique where we see the wreck as she is now and juxtapose it with what it was like back then. So, and I thought, you know, that's too sterile. I want to have a human interface between those two worlds. Okay, so that's a survivor. All right, now if I'm telling a story, a love story, that happened to someone in 1912, they have to either be really, really old now or really, really young then, or both. Right. And so, you know, I wound up with, you know, my protagonist being 102 in present day.
Was there any historical character that provided any insight to do it with as you did it?
Well, you know, I mean, the most elderly survivors that actually remember Titanic have died recently, unfortunately. But they were
seeing your movie.
Yes, unfortunately, although it might have been traumatic for them. So you know, I don't know about that. But you know, Edith Hazeman was, I think, 99 or maybe even 100 when she died just a year or so ago. So you know, there's a historical precedent for people being still alive who remember the event clearly. My sort of model as a character for Rose was an artist in Ojai in California, Beatrice Wood, who's 103 years old, and I wanted to meet and interview someone when I was in the writing stage, who was that age and had a very exciting and passionate life, and I wanted to see what her memories were like, how vivid they were, you know, because this is really a movie about memory. It's a movie about what you take away from an event, from a loss like that, and how you go on. And so I was really very interested in her. So I told her that I wanted to model my 102-year-old character upon her, if that was all right. Although she had nothing to do with Titanic, it was really just the fact that she was alive at that time.
As we record this, we're at one disadvantage, which is that people haven't seen the movie yet because it hasn't opened, and therefore they don't know what we're talking about in part. I want to introduce them to that. The story that's important to know for someone as part of this conversation is that this is a story in which you find someone. Right. It's a story of people who are going to the Titanic looking for riches,
wealth.
Yeah, they want to get
plunder
rich by finding. They want to plunder.
They're pirates.
You know, and they find, and they're looking for jewelry, and they find the story of this woman, and she leads them to the story of this great romance between a young woman who's going over to marry a very wealthy man in Philadelphia, and she falls in love with a young man who happens only to get on the Titanic because he had a poker game in which he won a ticket, and he's in steerage, and the two of them engage.
This is good. It's very succinct. You got it. That's good.
and the story is off and running in terms of what happened to him. She is pulled towards him and rebels against the man who would be her
He's
fiancé.
an artist, a free spirit.
And he paints her picture and painting, and there's a beautiful diamond as part of it. The male lead, why'd you choose him?
Well, Leonardo, I mean, I think anyone once you know they've seen the film will get it. They've seen his other stuff, and his characters have been
Juliet and
yes. And Romeo and Juliet is a very passionate, very very full of life character. I wanted Jack to have a little bit of that quality. Jack Dawson, his character in the film, I wanted him to have a lot of that. I also wanted him to have this kind of very easy, almost Buddha-like calm or inner peace. When he comes into a situation, he doesn't care how rich or how ostentatious the setting. He can just sit down and he can just talk to somebody. I told Leo, you're a guy who can shake somebody's hand and Xerox their soul. And it's what makes him a great artist, or potentially a great artist, because he's still an unknown, you know, in this film. And Rose is almost the opposite when we first see her. She's very stiff. She's very interior. She's obviously quite troubled. We don't exactly know why. She's under a cloud. But as she emerges, you know, like a butterfly from a cocoon, as the film progresses, under Jack's influence or kind of catalysm, if you will, she turns out to be very similar to him. Very, you know, she has a joyful, very creative spirit as well.
They strike each other's spirit.
Absolutely.
Roll tape. Here is a scene between the two of them. Okay, so we're now introduced to the characters. I mean, those two, we saw the Rose looking as Jack is talking about.
Isn't she beautiful?
Yes. So they're off, and Titanic is off. Tell me about the difficulties of making the movie, and the financing and sacrifices you had to make to get it on the air, and what your determination was.
That'll be a mouthful.
Right. Tell me about that. And how do you go about making this kind of movie? Okay. Now that you've got your story set, now you've got your character set, now you've got your actors set, now you got to make a movie.
Well, it all starts with the pitch, right? So I go in and I sit down at 20th Century Fox and I say, okay, guys, here's the picture, all right? It takes place in 1912. It's a period drama. We can't have any stars because the characters are too young, and it's probably going to cost north of $100 million. And everybody dies at the end, and there's no sequel. No sequel possibility. What do you think? Right. Sound good? And they're like, let us think about this. Yeah. No, it's difficult.
So you told them right up front, we're talking about more than $100 million.
3-hour movie, more than 100.
And if you make a 3-hour movie, that means that it can't be played but so many times in a theater, and they're not thrilled about that.
Exactly. Plus, you know, you can't have a toy line sprung out of it. You can't have an indefinite number of sequels. Theme park attraction is right out. Yeah. You know, you go in but you don't come out. But you know, so it's a tougher sell. It goes against the grain of Hollywood wisdom to do a picture on this scale, in that budget range, without all of those things that give them comfort.
So what do they say?
Let us see the
script.
They
say you're James Cameron, go.
Well, yeah, there was a bit of that, and I have
because you had a little deal with them anyway.
I have a relationship with them, and they trust me, and we've gone into precarious places before and come out of it looking good. So, you know, it held them back that one step, and I said, let me write the script, and I'll show you that. So then they read the script, and they're literate people. They could see it on the page. They could run the picture in their head, and they said, you know what? We really hate it that we like this so much, because now we're going to have to make it. You know, so we went into it knowing or thinking that we knew the dangers.
But this does not describe what you have done so brilliantly here, and I'm not the one to say that, but critics say that, which is the way you have used all kinds of things, and the fact that you had to build this boat in where, Mexico somewhere?
Right, in Mexico.
That is 9/10 this, what was that?
It's virtually full scale. There's just parts of it that we didn't build.
Yeah.
But the part that we did build is full scale. It was 60 feet from the boat deck down to the water. And when we were loading those lifeboats...
Now,
boy,
is that in the script, and how, all the stuff that you're going to do, the dynamics of what special effects?
I mean, you know, we describe the scenes, but sometimes there's you know, a line that says, it says something, and then when you actually get into it, it's $1 million to shoot that one line.
To make you see it.
Yeah, exactly, to see it. I mean, you know, first thing we did was we built a big model of the ship, 25 feet long, and we acted out all the scenes on deck with toy soldiers and a little video camera, and studied what the angles would need to be, and learned our environment. And then we decided this will have to be an effect, that'll have to be a set, and then there's a gray area in between.
Then Paramount gets involved.
That was later. We actually were already greenlit and already officially making the film. Kate and Leo were on. I was casting away. We were building like crazy. And then Fox wanted a partner to share the pain.
Maybe to get a little nervous, did they?
No, it was a given. It was a given. In fact, Peter Chernin, you know, who was running the film division at Fox at that time, he's now, you know, the capo di tutti capi there. News Corp, right. He said, I want a partner on this. And I said, fine, you find the partner, I'll go start making the film, so we'll divide and conquer, you know. So they brought in Paramount, and
for $65 million?
Yeah, Paramount was capped, and obviously they've been happy with that deal.
It was a great deal.
It turned out to be a great deal for them, yeah.
Yeah. Now, the story about you is that you have given up what? And just going to take your screenwriter's salary, which is sizable, but you've given up your points and all that, or not? Is that true?
Yes, no, that's true. That's true. It evolved. You know, it's not something that I probably, if I had been told in advance, you're going to work for 3 years for nothing, I would have said thanks very much. You know, as much as I love this film and as much as I am passionate about it, I mean, it's not something I probably would have gone into.
Here comes my little criticism. I wanted to see more conversation.
I'm thick-skinned. You can do fire away.
I haven't read this anywhere. I wanted to see. That's what excites me about this. The two things excited me about it. I mean, I like the love story as well, and Jacob Astor's on this.
Right.
He goes down with the ship.
Right.
Guggenheim, I forgot what his first name was. Benjamin Guggenheim goes down with the ship.
Right.
And lots of other people go down.
Right.
And they're great stories. I wanted to hear more about what they were saying to each other.
Right.
You see it, but you don't hear much conversation. The musicians play, and the guy says to the other guy, I'm honored to have played with you.
I like that moment. That's a nice moment.
I did too. But I wanted to hear more of that. And was that a conscious decision because it would detract from the story that's engaged us so far, which is the romance, and will they make it, or who's going to make it?
It was an editing decision. I actually shot more of that stuff, and I was very enthralled with it myself when I was making the film, but ultimately that was the territory that had been covered before. I thought, you know, we did it very well, and I had very good actors, so it was worthy to spend the time to shoot it. In the cutting room, I found myself focusing more on Jack and Rose because I felt personally that one could be very factual about Titanic and very correct, and not be as truthful emotionally. And that in a way, sometimes by spending more time with the fictional characters, it puts you in an emotional place of openness to the greater tragedy, you know, without the specific details. And I think that the audience does go through this kind of experiential curve where they do allow themselves to open up. And at the end, when you experience the thing that has never been filmed about Titanic before, the aftermath, the immediate aftermath of the people in the water and the moral dilemma of the people in the lifeboats, you're very sensitized at that point, and I think it has a lot of power for that reason. But it was a question of orchestrating it, and there were too many notes, you know. But we'll put it in the Laserdisc. So I'll send you a copy of the Laserdisc, and you can see all that historical stuff.
We're going to see now a scene from the boat has hit the iceberg. And they know, the guy who designed the boat knows it's got 2 hours. I mean, it's a magnificent story. And you do see some of that. Individual characters you've gotten to know. You see how they're going to go to their death. They choose the place and the mood. Did you know about this?
Oh, yeah. It's all very, very carefully...
the ship's designer went there?
Yes. Thomas Andrews, who designed the ship and built it, spent 3 years of his life on his baby, was on board, was the first one to really know that they were doomed, that the ship was doomed.
Because they're going into 5 of the holes rather than
5 instead of 4. Right, so close. You know, it was all just by a very tiny margin that it all happened. And he would have known that. And the heartbreak of that character has been one of the things that fascinated me most about the historical side of Titanic, that he was there, that he was on board. He chose to stay and die with his creation. Yeah. He chose to stand at the fireplace in the first-class smoking room, you know, arguably one of the most beautiful places on the ship that he had created, and go down with the ship.
How do we know that?
He was seen there by a steward who ran through moments before the ship actually, you know, went up to an extreme angle and broke up. So instead of the steward running through, I play it in the film as if the steward has already gone through, and then my two characters come in and see him standing there and ask him why he's not trying.
And how do we know that the captain went to his...
He was seen going to the wheelhouse moments before the front end of the boat deck plunged under the surface and the wheelhouse was covered with water. You know, it's not known exactly, and his body was never recovered. Most of the people who floated off the ship wearing their life belts, their life preservers, were recovered. You know, the bodies were recovered because they were kept...
They froze to death in a matter of what?
Right, hypothermia.
In what, 15 minutes? Or
it varied by individual, probably anywhere from a couple of minutes to as much as 45 minutes. You know, the people in the lifeboats described the moaning and the screaming. You know, it's quite horrific, really quite heart-wrenching.
People screaming about the coal and...
Save us, come back. Come back and save us. They knew those lifeboats were out there somewhere in the darkness, and they were in 28-degree water screaming for their lives, and the boats didn't come back.
Why didn't they come back?
Because everybody was terrified.
They were terrified if they came back to be sucked into the whatever? Or?
It's hard to understand. I mean, I think you have to put yourself in where they were and how inconceivable the event was. I mean, I imagine them being the same as the people who were wandering around after the bomb went off in Hiroshima, just stunned, not able to deal with the situation. It was so much bigger than them, you know. And so they're out in these lifeboats. They're chilly. They're freezing in the middle of the big black ocean, and the enormity of it, you know, hasn't even sunk in yet. And they hear these people screaming, and I think they were just gut scared, you know. And so you ask yourself, if I was in that boat and I looked around and I saw a lot of empty seats, and I knew in the back of my mind, even if I didn't want to admit it, that we could save people, what would you do? You know, that's really the most interesting moral dilemma. And so only one guy went back. This, you know, cocky young Welsh officer, 5th Officer Lowe. He got a bunch of boats together. He transferred passengers over until he got one completely empty boat that could hold 70 people. And he got a couple sailors and they rowed back. And we see that.
Yeah. And
they did save a couple.
They did save a couple that hadn't frozen at that time.
Yeah, but they got there a little too late to really do much good.
Wow. Roll tape. This is a scene after the boat, the Titanic, the boat that could not sink, has hit the iceberg. Let me talk now about making the movie.
Oops. That's gonna hurt.
Well, that's where it became, you know, tough. That's where...
That's the hard stuff.
Yeah.
That's the hard stuff to shoot.
How did you do it?
In general, in a general sense?
Give me a sense of the overwhelming challenge of making a movie that tries to take you onto a boat that is sinking into the ocean.
Well, first of all, the ship was huge, and it took us a long time just to sort of get our arms around the enormity of this thing, the physical setting of the film, and how we were going to create that. It took us months and months of engineering and figuring out how we were going to angle the sets and so on, and then how we would use visual effects to complement it all. But really, when you're out there on the shooting day, the logistics are the staggering part. You know, you've got literally maybe 1,000 extras, and they all have to be in perfect period wardrobe, and they all have to be, you know, told what to do and how to perform.
Perfect period wardrobe you sent people around the world looking for.
Yes, yes. Well, well, like I said, we tried to be accurate, and all the costumes are very accurate to the period. But and then to get all these people into the water, I mean, that scene was in cramped quarters, and we were dealing with large volumes of water, and that's very potentially dangerous for the crew and for cast and stunt people and so on. It all has to be done exactly correctly, which, you know, knock wood, fortunately it was. But, you know, in some of the other scenes, we'd have 200 people on a big hydraulic set of the ship, and we'd just lower that into the water, and they'd all get swept off by the water pouring in and pouring over it, and that all had to be done safely. We hired a lot of lifeguards as extras, you know, so they had their wetsuits on underneath their period jackets and so on. But, you know, the logistics of it are staggering. The safety requirements, the safety protocols are staggering. I don't think any one of us, and we all, you know, had experience doing big pictures, really knew what it was going to take to make this film until we got out there. What was the
toughest challenge for you?
I think, well, artistically, the toughest challenge was the chemistry of the love story, because all that other stuff doesn't count.
Yeah, right. But you got that.
Right, but from a production standpoint, I think the toughest challenge was safety. at all times. You know, we had thousands of amps of electricity going into the set, which is in salt water, with hundreds of people around it and on it, and keeping it electrically safe, you know, keeping it safe in water. I mean, you know, I love to dive. I've been a scuba diver since I was 16. I've spent a lot of time.
Well, speaking of that, you went down 3 times? How many
Yes,
times did you go
12
down?
times.
12 times?
Yes.
Now, why was that important for you, to see the Titanic lying on the bottom of the ocean near Newfoundland?
Well, first of all, let's be very frank here. You know, once I had the possibility of the opportunity, you could not have stopped me. So it was a question.
Because what? You had to see it because you're going to spend 5 years of your life.
I think that might have been at the core of it. I mean, I justified it by the fact that we didn't go there for research. Yeah. We went there to shoot part of the film. We actually shot scenes from the movie that would have had to have been recreated. Yeah. We would have had to recreate it all with models, and that has its own price tag dangling from it. So when it seemed that the numbers were close to a wash, then it was, let's go. Let's really shoot the Titanic. And that was exciting. But I don't think I could have...
What's it like down there?
It's very black. You know, there's no sunlight. It's freezing cold. It's as sterile and barren as the moon. And it's almost like having gone to another planet. But yet here's this historical object there. You know, so there's a surrealism almost to that. And then as you make repeated dives and you spend time with the ship, you become familiar with, oh, there's the first class entrance, there's the window to the captain's quarters, there's the davit for boat number 1, which was launched with so-and-so in it, you know, Cosmo Duff Gordon, and you know who were the people that were in the boats. And so it becomes, the human face of the drama is superimposable on what you're seeing through the viewport as you're seeing it, you know, if you've done your research. And so you come away with it with an umbilical to the event that I don't think I would have had going through endless books and research.
If someone, this is not a new idea, if someone came to you and said, we now have technology to raise the boat, you would say what?
I think it should be left where it is.
It's a tomb, and therefore do not disturb.
It's a tomb, and it's a memorial, you know, and its inaccessibility, I think, gives it a certain stature. It's like a memorial at the top of Mount Everest, you know. Filming it in place has so much more power than seeing it outside of a hotel in Las Vegas or something. You know, I mean, where would you put it? Where would you put it that would have emotional power? You know, it would only be devalued. But frankly, I don't think that technology will ever exist. I mean, the thing weighs 48,000 tons and it's stuck in the mud, you know. So it's going to be down there, I think, until it rusts away.
And you felt what down there, other than the fact it was like the moon and like it's cold and like it's dark?
But yeah, that's your initial feeling.
Are you overwhelmed by the notion of there are people here who died here?
Well, maybe not ghosts, because I don't necessarily believe in ghosts. But you know, I was able to visualize what happened, and we took the robot inside the ship, and we looked around, and you could see
what's the robot?
The ROV, the little orange robot that you see in the film. We actually took it inside. We didn't intend on doing that, but we did it, and you can see the kind of the ghostly grandeur still there, and no one had photographed that. So that was very exciting, but also emotionally overwhelming. And it's hard to exactly say what the emotional impact of that is, other than the fact that the film is the result of that. You know, the creative decisions made on the film is directly a result of that. Wanting to, you know, you asked me before about what was in and what was out, and why wasn't there more of the historical thing. It's because I felt that I had to convey an emotional truth or an emotional reality of the event, and that was my mission when I left the shipwreck. If that makes sense. I mean, it sounds kind of hokey, but you know, you've interviewed the people that in the past that found the wreck,
Ballard,
and they talk in very profoundly emotional terms about the experience, and it almost sounds a little hokey and self-serving unless you've been there and spent the time, and then it has an effect on you.
Roll tape. This is one more scene into the film where they're going through their own frantic effort to stay alive. They are on the very tip of the...
right at the back.
At the bow.
Poop deck.
Yeah, and it's going to tip up like that and slide, and they're all going to slide off.
Right.
You said only 3 people survived that in actuality.
I think two or three. One was the baker, who actually climbed over the railing as the ship went up vertical. He climbed over the railing and stood on the hull of the ship and rode it down like an elevator. And he was, you know, drunk out of his face. he'd drunk an entire fifth of scotch.
At the moment it's happened, or
just a little bit earlier, because he assumed he was going to die.
He rides it down.
He rides it down. He gets in
and
the
why
water.
wasn't he sucked into the bottom?
Well, many people were, but I think the suction wasn't as great as everybody thinks it was. There was probably some upwelling of air that maybe pushed him back up.
And he ended up in a boat.
Yeah,
I assume.
Yeah. Well, he clung on to the overturned lifeboat and half in and half out of the water for a couple of hours. His legs freezing in 28-degree water, and they were saved the following morning by Carpathia.
Yeah. And I assume that in reality, when you see this film, you want to go back and read this stuff. What's the best book on the Titanic?
Well, the Illustrated History, which is a more recent book by Don Lynch, illustrated by Ken Marshall. That was a big influence on us. We called it the Bible. You know, we'd be working on a shot, and I'd say, "Turn to page 35 of the Bible." That's you know, so that's a very good source. And of course, Walter Lord's books, A Night to Remember, very well researched,
which was made into a movie, wasn't it?
And made into a movie. And
Did you
I think
see
59.
that a lot? And was it instructive for you at all?
Yeah, I think it's a very good film. I think it's a very good, earnest film, a factual, docudrama kind of approach to the material, but a very good film.
Now let's talk about you as a director.
Oh, must we?
The first cinematographer leaves after a couple of weeks, right? What was the problem? Just
that was a sort of mutual thing. He had been directing himself, and I think he was more comfortable with the type of filmmaker who spends all their time with the actors and isn't so concerned with the image and likes to be kind of the maestro of that area. And that's very good for some directors. But I like to be involved in everything. I'm very hands-on.
Tell me what kind of filmmaker you are, because
I think
much has been written about that.
I think hands-on, and not because of some aberrational psychological need to have control. It's really because I love all aspects of filmmaking. I really love it. If we were doing a scene, I'd be moving this table to get it to the right spot under the lights. I mean, I love to do it all. For me, it's a tactile experience. I don't know any other way to do it. I didn't go to film school, so I sort of don't know how you're supposed to do it.
Yeah.
I only know sort of how I always did it, and I started out with 2 or 3 people and a camera and did everything myself, and it's just sort of scaled up from there, but my methodology is the same.
How did you get to make movies then?
There's always an element of luck and being in the right place at the right time. But you also have to be very determined and very focused. I gave myself a free film school education I worked as a truck driver, and on weekends I would go down to USC and sit in the library all day and read books on how films were made. And it cost me the cost of the Xeroxing of these doctoral dissertations on optical printing and things that I made big binders of stuff, and I basically it was like putting yourself through law school, on the closed cover before striking school of law, it was like that. And then I went to work for Roger Corman, working at the lowest of the low budget.
So many people have gone through that. What is it about Roger Corman's films and the opportunity he gives you that turns out people who know how to make movies?
I think it's the survivors of that experience that know how to make movies. There's a lot of culling going on there. Like the baby sea turtles going down to the ocean. Most of them get eaten by the seagulls and only a few make it. The ones that come through that and survive and still want to make films, they've been through hell, they've been through fire, And
so what's the hell and what's the fire?
Well, it's mutually, it's what you would call mutual exploitation. He's exploiting you by not paying you anything, and you're exploiting him by getting access to film equipment and getting the opportunity to say, I worked on a real movie. Yeah, it was a little movie, but it was a real movie. And the hell is, hideously long hours and no pay.
Who influenced you? Who movies would you watch and say, yeah?
Everything good. I love science fiction, so when I was a kid, 2001 had a big effect on me because I wanted to know how things were done. But everything. I mean, when I was in high school, that was the time that I fell utterly, madly, passionately in love with movies. And what were the movies that were coming out in the late 60s? It was Easy Rider and Catch-22 and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. It was all over the map. It was Independence and the last of the big spectacles. Dr. Zhivago came out in I think 69 or 70. And so you've got the last of the giant Hollywood studio spectacles for a time, and you've got this emergence of this whole independent cinema as a concept, so it was such a fertile time.
Do you believe this film, if it makes as much money as some predict it might, and it's got to make a lot of money just to break even?
Right, exactly.
If it costs, the figures 200 million. Some say it was as high as 235 million. I mean, is it
To make the picture, it was 200.
It was 200. So
yeah.
you're saying it was 200. Don't
It's
forget to.
pretty much right on the money. I mean, it was a little under, and then when we pushed back in post-production, it slipped over.
So what does it have to make to break even? I mean, with all the international da-da-da-da-da-da.
Well, probably in the neighborhood of between 3 and 350. You know,
You'll do that in a second.
You can do it. You can do it. I mean, True Lies made
That's
more than
gonna
that.
happen.
You know, it's
Yeah.
a global market. It's a global market. So you have to remember that a film that travels well, that has a lot of visual power to it, and the film will, I believe, travel well because we've had tremendous response, you know, in the foreign markets as well. You know, it can make a multiple of what it makes in the U.S. and Canada.
Think what you went through. Scream.
I'd rather not.
Well, I want to talk more about that too. Scream just opened over the weekend. $39 million.
That's awesome.
That's
great.
awesome.
More
isn't
power
it?
to him.
Yeah.
It's Wes Craven.
And that's
I
a
know Wes.
great opening. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
It's a fabulous opening. You know.
for a film that probably cost him, what, 40 million to make?
And that's part of the fun too. You know, I mean, part of the fun is that you have this kind of David and Goliath environment, and a little film can come from nowhere. I was so proud when I made The Terminator, and we went up against Dune in 2010 for
And who
the
remembers
science
them?
fiction dollar.
Yeah.
These you know, mega pictures, and we creamed them. You know, I mean, that's part of the fun. But I think that you know, Scream and Titanic are such divergent audiences. You know, it's really, you know, are people going to go see Titanic and have a great cinematic experience? They shouldn't worry about how
Clearly
much
they
the
are,
picture
yeah.
costs. They shouldn't worry about it. You know, a ticket costs $7.50 or $8, or I think a little more here in New York. But you know, it's the same amount to go see Scream, which is, I think, you know, a $20 million film, maybe a little more.
When you watch this film, what are the moments in it that sort of are very, very, very special? What's at the top of your list of scenes, moments, you know, or a visual experience that you look at with great?
There are two, and they both are at the bow of the ship, and I think it's because, having gone to the wreck, the bow is the part that is so intact that you can really see a ship. When Jack sees the dolphins, and it's a purely cinematic moment, you know, of acting, of his character, of the music, and the spirit, and bringing the ship back to life was more exciting for me than sinking it again. You know, I mean, I think most people that watch the film would disagree with that.
Recreating the grandeur of the Titanic was exciting for you.
Yeah, it was. Or seeing it now, seeing that accomplishment is more fun for me.
We saw a little bit of that in the opening thing that I ran in the introduction, where
Right.
you see it moving out and the
Right.
tug sort of leading the way.
Right.
What
You
else?
can't appreciate the sinking if you don't appreciate the ship and the accomplishment of the ship and what it represented to those people. And you can't appreciate what they experienced if you can't put yourselves in their place and create a kind of amnesia about what the name Titanic means, so that you have to go into the film experiencing their optimism and their joy at being on this greatest sort of achievement of their civilization.
What's the most heroic story you know and the most cowardly story you know about the Titanic?
Well, I think, you know, Bruce Ismay is probably the most cowardly story, because here's a guy who was probably, if any one person was responsible, it would have been him. I mean, the buck stopped with him, and he's the one that urged the captain to go a little faster.
Go faster, set the record.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and then what did he do?
And then he got off on a lifeboat. When he looked around that deck and he knew that there were still over 1,000 people on that ship, and he got into a lifeboat and saved himself, those people were his responsibility.
And whatever happened to him?
He died in obscurity, a hermit. I mean, not a hermit, but a recluse. You know, he was never found guilty of any, you know, legal culpability.
But he knew.
But he knew, and everybody else knew. You know, and it was just not. It was just not an honorable thing.
And how much of that was it as this ship went to its grave?
Oh, very much. You know, I mean, it's interesting to project ourselves into that situation with our, you know, 1997 mindset, and I've tried to do that a lot. But there was a fundamental difference in the way that people saw the world in those days, and people were, I think, more willing to die a noble death in those days than people might be now. I think the women and children might have, you know, footprints on their backs, you know, if they got between.
Today.
Yeah, today.
You thought something about courage that was there might not be here today.
Yeah, I think I think it's also overdone. I think this wistfulness for a different time and a different sort of moral standard is overdone. I think that the veneer of civilization did get stripped away on Titanic. I think a lot of people who probably thought they were very civilized and very gentlemanly did not behave that way when push came to shove.
Death was imminent, they did the cowardly thing.
Yeah, but there are still these incandescent moments of Benjamin Guggenheim dressing.
What did Benjamin Guggenheim do?
He went back to his room, he put on his formal white tie and long tail coat, and he came down, and top hat, and came down and told the stewards, "I don't want a life preserver. I've dressed in my best, and I'm going to die as a gentleman."
Give me a brandy.
Yeah, well, I added that, but I was trying to get into the spirit of who this man was, you know, and there was a panache, there was a style, you know, as well.
Who else?
John Jacob Astor.
What did he do?
You know,
Do we know?
He was the richest man on the boat, one of the richest men in America, and
do we know what he did?
He was very much in love with he was, I think, 48 or 50. He was very much in love with his 18-year-old wife, Madeline, who was pregnant with their child. He put her into a lifeboat and said goodbye and stood back. You know, I think that would be a hard thing for us. I mean, I think, you know, in America especially, we have this idea that the wealthy will always get over. They'll always, you know, they'll always find a way. They'll buy themselves in. And I show a character doing that as well, because you can't tell me that didn't happen. But the exceptions, you know, the John Jacob Astors, the Benjamin Guggenheims are famous for that. You know, I mean, that's what's so inspiring about this.
Now, where's this scene of John Jacob Astor saying goodbye to his 18-year-old bride?
I don't have that in the film. I mean, I used Guggenheim
I will see
as
that
a
at some point in my life.
Yeah, okay. All right. When I send you the laser disc, then you'll see it. Okay.
All right. So, as you made this film, and you're thinking and knowing and it's working and all this kind of stuff, and then you, by the time it was postponed, did you pretty much finished it?
No, we still had work. I mean, we postponed it a couple of months before we were supposed to release it, so we just sort of reapportioned the work to a more like livable schedule.
What was your deepest reservation as you sort of went into the backstretch, going towards finishing the film? Reservation. What sort of fear did you have there?
Well, we were all petrified. I mean, we had done this big picture. It was clearly being misunderstood in the media. People were lumping it in with the other disaster films.
It was Waterworld all over.
Yeah, not that so much. That didn't bother me as much as getting lumped in with Volcano and Dante's Peak, fine films, but disaster films. And I knew that that's not what we were making. And everybody sort of had written it off as a disaster film, and they didn't really understand what we were trying to do.
And you wanted to say to them what?
You know, ultimately you can't say anything. The movie says it for you. So,
but you want to say this is Titanic, the love story.
This is a love story. This is a love story. It's about people. It's about the human heart and the human spirit. And you know what? You can say that till you're blue in the face, and it just sounds like a boring movie that nobody wants to see. You know, you have to go and experience the film to know what that means. You know, because you see so many films that where people say those exact things that I just said, and boy, they're just dreadfully boring. You know what I mean?
Here's what's interesting, and I want to explore with you a second. What fascinates you and what fascinates me is acts of courage and cowardly and wonderful stories of love and people. That's what interests you.
Right. Self-sacrifice.
Self-sacrifice. All that. The human dimension.
Right.
You could do that without all the special effects, without all this other stuff. So why is that necessary?
That wouldn't be any fun.
All right. So just tell me why. Because because if you were asking people to spend $8 or whatever it is, you're asking them, I'm going to give you an experience that you can't get anywhere else.
Right.
Is that what you're going to tell them?
We're going to put on a show.
We're going to put on a
show.
We're going to show you what it's like when a boat goes down.
Yeah.
This is how it happens. This is what it looks like. This is what it feels like. This is what it would be.
You're there.
This is the closest thing to being there.
You're there.
In my movie.
You're there. And to me, that was also a goal. That was also an important goal. You know, you could do, and I look forward very much to doing a film that doesn't require the visual effects and the big sets and all that sort of thing, because I know I can do that. You know, and I enjoy that part of the work very, very much as a writer and as a director. And you're right, you can do a film that doesn't have all those things in it. There's something about Titanic that I thought if you're gonna visit this subject in the late '90s with all the stuff that we can do now, let's do it right almost for the first time. And I don't mean to put down the other films, but they didn't have access to the technology that we have now. You know, 30 years later, we can do it better. We can do it more real.
On the set, you are tyrannical.
Well, I'll address that.
You are demanding.
I'll cop to that.
You're willing to risk the people not liking you in order to get your movie made. You
not the cast. I think it's important to have a good relationship with the cast.
Did you and Kate end up okay?
We were always okay.
Kate,
story? Yeah, that's that. You know, you know, Kate and I had a great time during the film. It was a very hard picture, and for her, an unexpectedly difficult and stressful experience to go through. Length, you know, she had done much smaller films. The physicality of it, you know, she wasn't used to that. She hadn't done the sort of films that I've done in the past. But we had a great, you know, artistic bond on the film. I was very much inside her head, and the same with Leo. And the other thing is, you see, the thing that does get, I think, misunderstood is it was a cult of perfectionism. I mean, no one is more of a perfectionist than Leonardo. No one is more of a perfectionist than Kate.
They match your sense of...
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we would egg each other on. I mean, it was tragic for the crew, because we'd be on take 10 and just getting gleeful, you know. And Billy Zane the same way, and Francis Fisher. I mean, these are people.
Leo?
Leo is unlimited. Unlimited.
He's 21, 22 years old, isn't he?
Yeah. Leo is a guy who, fortunately, understands his gift well enough to be able to go to the hardest thing he can find. He will always seek out the hardest thing.
What does that mean?
Well, he will seek out the hardest character, the most challenging thing, the thing to prove himself against. You know, so he's a lot like me in that sense. He looks for the challenge.
No kidding.
And he didn't want to make this picture because he didn't think playing a quote-unquote leading man, a kind of, you know, I think he thought it was going to be kind of a square-jawed action hero, which of course he's not. He's a very complex character, but he's also very pure of heart. So he wasn't finding the handles as an actor, you know, the sort of the props, if you will. You know, I always kid him. I say that the tick or the hump. You know, the Richard III thing. He wasn't finding the thing that, you know. It took me 3 months to convince him that it was very, very hard to do what he ultimately wound up doing.
What would you do differently?
That's a very good question, and I've been thinking about it recently for all the obvious reasons. But I think what we did wrong was we tried to build a studio facility and one of the biggest, most complex sets in recent film history simultaneously. And we had two construction entities who had given us numbers for what this was going to cost, who then had to function in the same space at the same time. And the numbers were no longer relevant. And it was all about a date, a release date, you know, and we shouldn't have tried to go for a date. We should have tried to make the film on its own terms, you know. And I think that there would have been considerable savings. I think it still would have cost more than we originally thought, but I think it would have
doubled.
Well, you know, it didn't. I mean, we went off. We started the picture at about 125 million, and we wound up at 200. So it wasn't quite double. But it's a fair cop that it's considerably more than my other films. You know, Terminator 2 was a $100 million film. It was budgeted at 90. You know, so it went up 10%. I mean, this film went up considerably more than that. But I've taken my lumps. You know, I mean, I've put all my dough back into the film to try to ease it for the studio. I've gotten myself out of the way.
That was just stunning sacrifice on your part. I mean, you know, you did that. Now, if you hadn't done that, would the film have been made?
Oh yeah, we were well into it. It would have been made. There probably would have been compromises. My relationship with the studio would have been very strained. They were looking at a scenario where, you know, as you were pointing out earlier, it's going to be difficult, but certainly not impossible for them to get their money out and to make a profit. But it would have been much more difficult with me in the way as a gross profit participant. So I said, fine, take me out of the way.
You've done that before, haven't you, or something similar to that? I mean,
not to that extreme. Yeah. No, I've put money in. I put money into Terminator 2, and I got it right back out. You know.
Did this change you at all? I mean, having done this film and gone through all of this and the nature of the film, you come out of it how?
Well, you know, I found myself having to make a decision whether I wanted to go ahead with Terminator 3 or not. And in post-production on Titanic, I was no longer interested. I realized these films are very hard to make. And you always have to be doing something new. And I felt I had gone into new territory as a filmmaker in Titanic, places that people didn't expect me to go and be any good at, you know. And now we see the film is working. We're getting good reviews. So I've proven that point, you know, to myself and to the industry. So I can do other things now, you know. So I think it does change you. You know, it also makes me realize that you have to know your limitations. You know, you have to know the limitations of the filmmaking system, not just my limitations, but all the very good people that I'm going to hire. There's a limit beyond which it gets away from you, you know, and it hurts. It hurts you. It hurts you financially, and you know, it puts you in a situation of stress you don't want to be in as an artist. So I'm not going to make another $200 million film. I'm not going to make another 3-hour movie.
What are you going to do?
You know, I mean, I'll still, I'm very happy to do, you know, a science fiction film or any film that's got big production numbers in it. I mean, make no mistake, I mean, I like that stuff,
Yes, I know.
you know. But I think it's a question of not, of knowing very clearly what the limitations are. I wanted to make this film so badly, I probably didn't admit the limitations to myself before the fact. I wanted to make this film really badly.
How close did you come to making the movie you wanted to make?
Pretty close. Pretty close. In fact, beyond, I think, what I thought we were doing. It was, every film is a discovery, you know, is a journey. And you find things about yourself and about your cast and about the material, you know, as you go along. I think the film exceeds what I set out to do. And that's a good feeling, you know, as an artist, because it doesn't always happen that way.
James Cameron, thank you very much.
It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.